On January 14th, millions of Americans picked up their phones and saw something unsettling. No bars, no data, just two words at the top of the screen, SOS only. Calls wouldn't go through, texts failed, apps froze. For hours, one of the largest wireless networks in the United States, Verizon, was effectively unavailable for a massive number of users. For a country that runs on mobile connectivity, this wasn't just inconvenient. It was a reminder of how dependent modern life has become on systems most people never think about until they stop working. So what actually happened? How widespread was the outage? Who was affected? And what does it reveal about the way our communication infrastructure really works? Let's walk through it, clearly, calmly, and step by step.
This is The Quiet Genius.
The outage began shortly after midday Eastern Time. Reports started appearing across outage tracking platforms as Verizon customers in multiple states noticed sudden service loss. Phones dropped to emergency-only mode. Voice calls failed, text messages stalled, mobile data connections vanished. Within hours, reports had spread nationwide. Major metropolitan areas, including New York, Washington, D.C., Chicago, Los Angeles, Boston, Houston, and Atlanta, were among those most heavily impacted, but this was not a city-specific problem. Customers from coast to coast reported disruptions. For many users, the outage lasted most of the day. Verizon later confirmed that service was largely restored by late evening, though some customers experienced intermittent issues as the network stabilized. When phones display SOS only, it means the device cannot connect to its carrier's network, but may still place emergency calls through any available signal. That distinction matters. During the outage, local officials in several cities warned that Verizon customers could have difficulty reaching emergency services through their phones, urging people to use landlines, Wi-Fi calling, or alternative devices when possible. And this is where the outage crossed from inconvenience into public concern. The impact went far beyond personal frustration. Businesses that rely on mobile connectivity were hit immediately. Retail stores using cellular-based payment terminals reported transaction delays. Delivery and logistics companies lost real-time tracking and driver communication. Healthcare providers, especially home care services, struggled to reach staff and patients who relied on Verizon devices. Financial institutions saw disruptions in authentication messages and fraud alerts. For large corporations with layered backups, the disruption was manageable. For small businesses, especially those dependent on a single carrier, operations simply slowed or stopped. This wasn't a system collapse, but it was a system stress test, and one many weren't prepared for. Public reaction followed a familiar pattern. First, confusion. People didn't know whether the problem was their phone, their location, or something larger. Then frustration. Social media filled with screenshots of phones stuck in SOS mode, complaints about lost service, and questions about emergency access. But beneath the frustration was something deeper. Unease. Parents worried about reaching schools. Workers couldn't authenticate logins. Drivers lost navigation mid-route. For many people, the outage exposed just how much of daily life is routed through a single device and a single network. Verizon acknowledged the outage and later stated that the disruption was caused by a software-related issue within its network infrastructure. The company emphasized that there was no evidence of a cyber attack. Engineering teams were deployed across the network to restore service, and Verizon issued public apologies as systems came back online. But technical specifics remained limited, a point that drew criticism from customers and industry observers alike. In response to the disruption, Verizon offered affected customers a $20 account credit accessible through its app. The reaction was mixed. Some customers appreciated the acknowledgement. Others felt the credit didn't reflect the scale of the disruption, especially for those who lost service for an entire day. Lawmakers and consumer advocates questioned whether credits should be automatic and proportional when outages reach this scale. The issue wasn't just compensation, it was trust. When a carrier builds its brand around reliability, moments like this matter, not because outages never happen, but because of how transparently they're handled. Regulators took notice. The Federal Communications Commission announced it would review the outage, focusing on network reliability and the implications for emergency communications. Local officials raised broader concerns. What happens when a single failure affects millions at once, and how resilient are the systems Americans depend on every day? Experts point to a growing reality in telecommunications. Modern networks are increasingly software-driven, cloud-managed, and interconnected. That allows for faster updates and greater efficiency, but it also means that a single software failure can cascade rapidly. In other words, the systems are powerful, but also fragile. One unexpected outcome of the outage was renewed attention on backup communication options. Wi-Fi calling, secondary carriers, and satellite-based messaging, features many users had never activated, suddenly became visible alternatives. For some, this outage was the first time they realized their phone could communicate at all without a traditional cellular signal. That realization stuck. The Verizon outage wasn't the longest, and it wasn't the first, but it was one of the clearest reminders that connectivity, something we treat as constant, is actually conditional. When it works, it fades into the background. When it fails, it affects work, safety, business, and trust all at once. This wasn't just about dropped calls, it was about dependence. As networks grow more complex, outages like this raise important questions. How much redundancy should carriers be required to maintain? How transparent should companies be when failures occur? And how prepared are individuals, businesses, and cities for sudden loss of connectivity? Those questions don't have simple answers, but they're becoming harder to ignore. The January Verizon outage wasn't just a technical failure, it was a moment of clarity. A reminder that the systems powering modern life, no matter how advanced, are still vulnerable. And that reliability isn't just a feature, it's a responsibility. If stories like this help you understand the systems behind everyday life without noise or exaggeration, you're in the right place. This is The Quiet Genius. Subscribe, and I'll see you in the next story.
Take away from all this. Let's go ahead and get the conversation started. Tell me what you think about this below.
Now I have something very special coming up for my true supporters. If you want to be a part of that group, the first one to get access, you want to click the link below, sign up for my wait list. Just like my people